be happy to have a further conversation there, because automatic enrolment is very important. It's made progress, but there will be more to do.
Caroline Noakes, of the Select Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's the menopause, child rearing, caring for elderly relatives, women are impacted across their careers in the contributions they make to their pensions. But most of all, they need better work opportunities, and they need the DWP to be championing them into better work, better paid work. Can my honourable friend the Minister outline what work she is doing with the Employment Minister to make sure that women's careers are at the forefront of the government's efforts?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I'll also ask my colleague, the Employment Minister, to write to the Right Honourable Lady to make sure there is a full update. But I would just briefly touch upon an example such as mandatory pay gap reporting, which is helping to drive progress.
Deputy Griffith.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're doing a huge range of work right across defence, institutional and cultural, to ensure that sexual harassment is not an issue. We've taken the complaints procedure out of the chain of command. We've established the Defence Serious Crime Unit to tackle any criminal wrongdoing, and we've introduced training right across the defence to ensure we generate a military culture that respects women, which is all the more important, Mr. Speaker, because they can now serve in every single role.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if the Minister's not already done so, I would recommend he make contact with the excellent organisation Salute Her, which I visited in North Tyneside, which supports women veterans, many of whom suffered sexual abuse in the armed forces, and their stories are harrowing. But I must remind the Minister that, shockingly, a recent MOD survey showed 1 in 7 women in the armed forces have been subject to sexual harassment in the last 12 months alone. So what more can he do in order to work with colleagues throughout the armed forces to really root out that dreadful culture?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have met with Salute Her, and we do pay attention to their recommendations. I should say that the work being done following the Wigston review is hugely important, and I also commend the work by our honourable friend from Wrexham. That body of work and the recommendations which we have overwhelmingly accepted will be carried out apace right across defence.
James Gray.
Speaker, I remain extremely concerned about the plight of LGBTQ+ service people who, before 2001, were routinely court-martialed, dismissed, lost their pensions, lost the right to wear the medals and so on. That's bad enough, but that remains the case until today. What more can the Minister do to put that demonstrable injustice right? It's no good setting up a committee. We want it sorted.
Well, I share his frustration, Mr. Speaker, and the Government looks forward to the recommendations of the independent reviewer, Lord Etherton, which will be credible and will take them very seriously.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
State.
Mr. Speaker, the increasing number of women in STEM has been a huge asset to our country. Look at Sarah Gilbert, the creator of the COVID vaccine. And around 35% of the wage gap can be overcome if we get more women into high-paid occupations, and that is exactly what we're working on.
Lack of diversity in science academia is an obstacle that must be overcome in order to maximise creativity and scientific innovation. Among the findings in cancer research is diversity data. In grant funding was that female and ethnic minority researchers hold fewer programme awards than their white and male colleagues. How can the Government level the playing field for women and ethnic minorities applying for research grants in these essential areas?
Well, I'm pleased to say that we're now seeing more women enter undergraduate courses in university, so it's now 42% of STEM students are at undergraduate level in the United Kingdom. And what we need to do is, of course, open up all of those research opportunities, those more senior opportunities in our universities.
Bob Blackman.
Speaker, the good news is, of course, that young women are taking up and studying STEM subjects, but there's a drop-off of those people then going into good, well-paid jobs. What more can she do to ensure that people continue to not only their STEM studies, but also continue in good careers?
Well, he's absolutely right that girls and women are moving through the STEM pipeline. We've seen a 31% increase in girls studying STEM subjects since 2010. And what we're seeing is more employers opening up opportunities around the country. We've got the STEM boot camps to help people mid-career with STEM training. And he's absolutely right. This is the way we're going to unleash talent in our country and make sure that we are leading in industries of the future.
Jessica Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasury carefully considers the equalities impact of policy on those sharing protected characteristics in line with both its strong commitment to promoting fairness and its legal obligations under the public sector equality duty. In May, the government announced over £15 billion of additional support targeted at those with the greatest need.
Jessica Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Single parents, 9 in 10 of whom are mothers, are among those most exposed to the cost of living crisis, particularly those aged 25 and under who get a reduced rate of universal credit. So what's the government doing to evaluate the impact of soaring prices on this group, and why is it not taking steps like ending the age-related universal credit limit?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government support package targets those most vulnerable households, including single parents, providing a £650 cost of living payment. I would certainly urge her constituent to contact her local council to see if the Household Support Fund can also be of assistance.
Shadow Secretary Anna Leastock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's report from the Resolution Foundation shows our economy is over a decade into a period of stagnation after 12 years of Tory rule. Yet all we see from the benches opposite is a chaotic Tory tombola of tax cuts and no plan for the more secure economy that women need. Because the impact on women has been stark, with 115,000 fewer women in employment now compared with before the pandemic. Does the Minister have any plans to halt this fall?
Minister.
What the Resolution Foundation has said is actually praised this government's handling of the cost of living pressures, and the cost of living support package totalling £37 billion this year is in line with our international competitors and actually more generous than our competitors in France, Germany and Japan.
And Liz Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there we have it. There is no Conservative plan to support women's employment. Now, women are being hammered by the Conservative cost of living crisis, which is getting worse by the day. After 12 years of economic failure, it's little wonder that Tory leadership candidates are trashing their own record. Now, how else can the Minister explain the fact that by next April, average real pay for full-time women workers will have fallen by £670 since the Tories came to power?
Minister.
There are more people in employment on payrolls than pre-pandemic levels, and women are driving that growth in our economy. The support programme this government has introduced is helping women back into work, and I hope that will benefit her constituents as well as mine.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Women's Budget Group, the UK government's erosion of the social security system is a key contributor to the current Tory cost of living crisis. Women, and particularly those with disabilities, caring responsibilities and those from ethnic minority backgrounds, are disproportionately impacted by this crisis, which is a crisis unlike things that most of us have ever experienced. So knowing that, what specific steps has the Minister taken to make sure that these equalities impacts are properly taken into account in the UK government's response to the cost of living crisis?
Well, as part of our cost of living support package, we've introduced a very specific disability cost of living payment, £150 per person. I'd also add to the Honourable Lady, at the spending review, the UK government gave the Scottish government £41 billion a year as part of its settlement, the biggest since devolution, and a 26% increase compared to the average across the UK.
Dame Caroline Daniel.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've set up a task force on women-led high-growth enterprise, which met for the first time this month. It will use its convening power to influence high-growth investors, the business community, and to raise aspirations of the next generation of female entrepreneurs right across the country.
Dame Caroline.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for that answer, but the fact is that if women were starting and scaling businesses at the same rate as men, it would add a staggering £250 billion to the UK economy. We need to turbocharge the investment and the support we're giving to female entrepreneurship. What thought have they given to pivoting some of the existing financial packages, such as the Enterprise Investment Scheme, to better support women-led enterprise?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Enterprise Investment Scheme has specific objectives. It is designed to encourage investment in higher risk early stage companies, but the government is committed to supporting women entrepreneurs in a range of ways, as highlighted, for example, by the implementation of recommendations from the Rose Review. I'd be happy to ask a colleague of mine to discuss the issue further with her.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Gosport rightly points out some problems with the government schemes, but the Minister, as she's also within the Department for Work and Pensions, should know that the way that childcare functions within Universal Credit doesn't help women become entrepreneurs either. So what conversations has she had with the other ministers she's in the department with and with civil servants about reform to childcare?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to a range of ways to help families, not just women, parents with childcare. And there are a set of messages that I think we could let go out from this exchange today, which includes encouraging families to take up the childcare options that are available, and there will be more that we can do to continue to encourage people to be able to take the work that is right for them and to support them as they do so.
Joanna Cherry.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Who's for it? Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, continuing the previous theme, we are committed to helping women in every workplace, and we have announced new initiatives to do that. For example, we've called on all employers to provide salary information in job adverts. As my right honourable friend has already articulated, we are helping women to return to STEM roles where their talents are most needed. And as already touched upon, a new task force will increase the number of women-led high-growth businesses.
Joanna Cherry.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Will she join me in welcoming the unequivocal judgment of the Employment Appeal Tribunal and the Employment Tribunal in the case of Maya Forstater against the Centre for Global Development, to the effect that gender-critical beliefs are protected under the Equality Act and that women, and indeed men, must not be discriminated against, harassed or victimised for either holding those beliefs or indeed stating them? And does she agree with me that all employers will require to review their workplace practices in human resources and their equality, diversity and inclusion policies to ensure that they comply with the law as stated in that judgment? And can she tell me what steps she will take to ensure that that happens?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for that question, and she is, as we all know, very thoughtful on these issues and looking very carefully at the important consequences of the issues at hand. The rulings in that case and other cases reflect the important balances that the Equality Act already provides for. I think the key point to make in response to her points is that we agree we must protect free speech and allow open discussion. It is, of course, the responsibility of all employers to ensure that they comply with the law as set out in legislation such as the Equality Act 2010 and interpreted by the courts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In March of this year, our government, the UK government, ratified the ILO Convention outlawing violence and harassment in the workplace, something which still disproportionately affects women at work. In ratifying that convention, the UK government needs to have in place a programme of work to prevent and also enforce the law around these issues. Could the Minister just outline how the government's going to go about making sure that they live up to the important provisions in that convention?
Minister.
My right honourable friend, as always, makes vital points, and I'm very pleased that she does. I will ask my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, to write to her with a fuller update so that she can be assured of the government's commitment to these vital matters.
Sir Atherton.
Question 7, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women are an integral part of our armed forces and have thriving careers. An honourable lady will know from her own report it contained a number of important recommendations. Having tested these recommendations with the Service Women's Network, we are adopting almost all of them. I should say, Mr. Speaker, we have a target of 30% inflow of women into the armed forces by 2030. We've got improved equipment and uniforms, wraparound childcare, but most importantly, we want to generate a military culture that respects women.
We can. MD, Sir Rotherton.
Since the Defence Select Committee's report, which highlighted inequalities for women in the military, the MOD has made good, if not excellent, progress, and change is being felt on the ground. The MOD went further and committed to hosting an international Five Eyes conference to share best practice.
Very good.
Would the Minister commit to attending with myself?
Yeah. Minister?
Yes.
Martin Docherty, use.
Following, Mr Speaker, the question for the Honourable Member for Wrexham's subcommittee report, can I actually ask the Minister if they're taking gender equality seriously in the armed forces, why they don't learn from the report shared by the Honourable Member and make sure that rape goes into civilian courts and doesn't remain an unequal basis within the court-martial system?
Mr Speaker, when he sees the formal response to the report, he will have no doubt that we are in earnest, in absolute earnest, in taking note of these recommendations. And the feedback I get, Mr Speaker, from young women serving in all roles right across the fence is that service life is something that women should really look forward to, and there are terrific role models that they can be very proud of.
Dr. Rupert.
Right, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As we prepare legislation to ban conversion practices, we continue to assess inequality impacts in relation to all protected characteristics, including gender reassignment. We intend to bring forward a ban that protects everyone and attempts to change their sexual orientation. There are different considerations for transgender conversion practices, and the government remains committed to exploring these.
Dr. Rupert.
Respectful debate to be had on single-sex spaces and on trans people in sports, but a full ban on conversion therapy, which they promised, and their failure on which caused one Equalities Minister to resign last week, isn't it. There's 8 Royal Colleges and the BME who want this. When will they act?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We want to ensure that everyone is protected from the extensive harm that conversion practices cause, and it is not unreasonable to take some extra time to avoid an unintended consequence and to build a consensus, so that together we can make our legislation as inclusive as possible.
Mike Freer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I welcome my honourable friend to her place? Could she reassure the House that the discussions and the legislation on banning conversion practices will include protecting everybody from these harmful practices?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I would like to acknowledge all the work that the Honourable Member for Finchley and Golders Green has done on this subject. And I absolutely agree that the legislation to ban conversion practices is fundamentally about protecting LGBT people from harm. And the experience of victims needs to continue to be at the heart of all considerations, as I know they have been by my honourable friend as the Minister.
Owen Thompson. Number 9. Who wants it? Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Rwanda is a safe and secure country with respect for the rule of law. We would only ever work with countries that we know are safe, and we will treat asylum seekers in accordance with relevant international human rights laws. Furthermore, Rwanda's constitution includes a broad prohibition on discrimination.
Owen Thompson.
Mr Speaker, the United Nations have said that the UK government's cruel Rwanda policy breaches international law. The Home Office's own equalities impact assessment in the policy clearly states the dangers for LGBTQI+ people, and the UK government's website advises against travel to Rwanda for LGBTQI+ people. Women for Refugee Women have stated that threatening to removal to Rwanda of women fleeing gender-based violence exposes them to further risk of violence and harm. How can the UK government justify this cruel policy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We have published a robust country assessment which will be used by caseworkers to inform relocation decisions for each individual case, and nobody will be relocated if it is unsafe to do so.
We now come to topicals. Julian Sturdy.
Number 1, Mr Speaker.
Sarah Stay.
Mr Speaker, the use of rape and sexual violence by Russian forces in Ukraine is central to their appalling war tactics. We are campaigning internationally for sexual violence to be treated as a red line in war, akin to the use of chemical weapons. We have sent a team of experts to the region to collect evidence, so that those committing these appalling war crimes can be held to account?
Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, Lib Dem-run York City Council is continuing with its restrictions to impact on blue badge holders and also dodging decisions on city centre parking. This is causing a huge disadvantage to rural communities in my constituency who have poor transport links. So will my right honourable friend agree that city centres should be? Will my right honourable friend agree that city centres should be accessible to all?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, passionately so, and as set out in the Equality Act, there are ways in which local authorities should do that. I will make sure that colleagues in these government departments know of his concerns.
Shadow Minister Tyrell Ward-Tammy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the Minister to her place. Whether it's finally addressing LGBT plus hate crime or finally publishing a women's health strategy, the Minister sure has a lot to catch up on. The Minister will be aware that her predecessor resigned last week because of the Conservative Party, and I quote, creating an atmosphere of hostility for LGBT plus people. This is a damning charge from a sitting Conservative MP. So, does the Minister agree with her predecessor?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government takes all hate crimes seriously, and we have robust laws to respond to them. And whilst police have recorded hate crimes targeting LGBT communities have increased, it is the biggest driver for this improvement in police recording and the increased willingness of victims to stop and to come forward. It is taken very seriously by the Home Office, and we are working with the police on this.
Celine Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Social Mobility Commission's index in Devon starts with South Hams at 49 out of 324, yet my North Devon constituency is at 238. What is my right honourable friend doing to level up regional inequalities such as this?
Thursday.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. One of the biggest issues we face in this country is geographical inequality. That's why we've appointed Catherine Burbelsing as head of the Social Mobility Commission. Her school, the Michaela School in Brent, is fantastic at helping level up amongst all groups of people, and we want to see more of those types of schools right around our country.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. E-scooters can be difficult for people with sight loss to identify and avoid, especially when they're ridden illegally on pavement because they operate quietly. So what assessment has the Minister made of the impact the illegal and unsafe use of e-scooters has made on people with visual impairment?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm meeting with the Department for Transport's Disability Champion this very afternoon, and I will take that question to discuss with her.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend congratulate my constituent, the jewellery designer Monica Bernarda, whose roots are in North Norfolk and whose head office is on the Holcombe estate, for winning the 2022 Queen's Award for Enterprise and Sustainable Development? Would she also agree with me how wonderful it is to see women in business promoting ethical and sustainable business practices around the country?
Tuesday.
Well, I'm pleased to say I've actually been to the Holcombe estate and I've seen her fantastic business operating in rural Norfolk, and we need to turbocharge rural economies. We need to get more women into business. We know that if women set up businesses at the same rate as men, it would add 250 billion to our economy, and she is a fantastic businesswoman.
Bill Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some black women in Southwark are disproportionately at risk of HIV, but are statistically less likely to access designated sexual health clinics. Does the Minister agree with the All-Party Group on HIV/AIDS report that access to PrEP needs to be improved for this group specifically through maternity units, at GP clinics and in community pharmacies?
Any of you would be welcome. I think the team
honourable
left a
gentleman
bit
is
early.
absolutely right. We need to make sure that we are protecting people from HIV.
Diana Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first got involved in politics when I was 16, and one of my many motivations for joining David Cameron's Conservatives was because of his socially liberal stance on LGBT+ issues. And one of our party's proudest achievements, in my view, is still introducing same-sex marriage. So will my right honourable friend confirm that whatever the outcome of the leadership election over the next few weeks, that she and the department will continue to prove that the Conservative government is on the side of LGBT people?
Well, I was proud to vote and support gay marriage. It's been a very important step forward for our country.
Final question, Munira Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, given that almost a third of kinship carers have a disability or chronic condition, and a child in kinship care is twice as likely to be black than white, it's clear that kinship carers and equality is issues. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss my kinship carers bill and how we can support kinship carers better who step up to support a child in crisis?
Yes.
Minister to sorry. Minister, I want the question answered. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it. Can you just answer the question?
Apologise, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Order, because I couldn't hear it. Sorry, please, Minister, try again.
Okay. I apologise for confusion, Mr. Speaker. The answer to the honourable lady is yes. I'm happy.
Excellent, thank you. That's very... Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. I start with Robin Miller.
Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow...
Just sit in there. Sit! Shut up a minute. What's this for? Come. Give me the word in. Order! Order! I say to the honourable gentleman, give me this. I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I will order you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out. I warn the honourable member that if there's protesting carrying out to... Shut up a minute. Does somebody want... Two at once. Give me the names.
Shout, get 'em out.
Order! Sit down, you want me in the future. I now warn the honourable members that if they persist in refusing to comply with my order to withdraw, I shall be compelled to name both of them, which may lead to them being suspended from the House. Right, names. To ensure that the honourable member complies. Kenny... Where's the names?
Neil Hanvey and Kemi
I order! Shut up. Shh. Neil Hanvey, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with them. Deal with them. Just sit down. Out! No. Sergeant at arms, escort them out. Take them out, Sergeant. Let them out.
Robin Miller.
Shh. Come on.
Insurrection. Just put the PM again.
No, then let's just see if we can... Mr. Costa, you don't want to go and escort them to the tea room, do you? No, I suggest not. I think you're good and better behaved than that. Right, we'll try again after that. Prime Minister will now go to Robin Miller.
Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow, the first instalment of the cost of living payment will start landing in the bank accounts of 8 million households across the country. This is a much-needed £326 cash boost for families and forms part of the £1,200 in direct support that we're giving to the most vulnerable households this year. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House was appalled and saddened, as I was, to hear about the despicable attack on Shinzo Abe. Our thoughts are with his family and loved ones and the people of Japan at this dark and sad time. Mr. Speaker, this week we remember the genocide in Srebrenica and the victims of those appalling events. We must learn the lessons of history and do all in our power to prevent such a thing happening again. We will continue to combat war crime deniers, both in Bosnia-Herzegovina and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Robin Miller. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his personal interest in Aberconwy, whether he's been eating ice cream on the pier in Llandudno, sampling Welsh Penderyn whisky, or standing on the granite quarry in Penmaen Mawr. He's seen why they love this constituency. He's also heard from them their gratitude for the vaccine and furlough programmes that this UK government delivered. So will my right honourable friend now support our plan to level up Aberconwy and our bid for almost £20 million of funding to invest in community and cultural programmes and give us the opportunity to match our potential?
I thank my honourable friend, and he's a great champion for Aberconwy, and I much enjoyed the Penderyn whisky that we sampled together. Mr. Speaker, I ignored the revolver, as some of you may have noticed. We are committed to uniting and levelling up the UK, and as for the second round of the Levelling Up Fund announcements, it will be coming, Mr. Speaker, this autumn.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, may I join the Prime Minister on his comments about the former Prime Minister of Japan, a deeply shocking moment, and of course his comments about genocide. Mr. Speaker, may I welcome the new Cabinet to their places. We have a new Chancellor who accepted a job from the Prime Minister on Wednesday afternoon and then told him to quit on Thursday morning. A new Northern Ireland Secretary who once asked if you need a passport to get to Derry. And the new Education Secretary, whose junior ministers have literally been giving the middle finger to the public. It is truly the country's loss that they will only be in post for a few weeks. Now, the Prime Minister must be feeling demo happy since he was pushed out of office. Finally, he can throw off the shackles, say what he really thinks, and forget about following the rules. So, does he agree? Does he agree it's time to scrap the absurd non-dom status that allows the super-rich to dodge tax in this country?
Prime Minister, well, I thank you very much, and it's perfectly true that I'm grateful for the ability to speak my mind, which I never really lost, Mr. Speaker. But what I'm focusing on is continuing the government of the country. And as I've just told you, Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow, £326 is arriving. Never mind non-doms, Mr. Speaker. Doms or non-doms, I don't mind. £326 is arriving in the bank accounts of 8 million vulnerable people. And how can we do that? Because we took the decisions to get the strong economy that we currently have, that I'm afraid were resisted by growth in May at 0.5%, Mr. Speaker, which they weren't expecting. We have. As I've told you before, Mr. Speaker, 620,000 more people in payroll employment than before the pandemic began. And one of the consolations of leaving office at this particular time, Mr. Speaker, is that vacancies are at an all-time high.
Keir Starmer.
Cut him some slack. Faced with an uncertain future, a mortgage-sized decorator's bill that'll be soon for somebody else's flat, I'm not surprised he's careful not to upset any future employers. So here's an even simpler one. Does he agree that offshore schemes can pose a risk because some people use them to avoid tax they owe here?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the investment that this country attracts from around the world, and he's talking about people from offshore people investing in the UK. I'm absolutely thrilled to see that we've had, I think, 12 billion in tech alone come in the last couple of months. I think it's possible, Mr. Speaker. He's referring not to me, but to some of the 8 brilliant candidates who are currently vying for my job. Let me just tell him that any one of them will wipe the floor with Captain. Wipe the floor.
Can I just say the furniture has to be repaired? And one of the members already had one bill. I'm sure he doesn't want another. Prime Minister.
Any one of them would wipe the floor with Captain Crasheroony Snoozefest, Mr. Speaker. And after a few weeks' time, that is exactly what they will do. They will unite around the winner and do just that.
Yes, Starmer.
He's been saying all week that he wants revenge on those that have wronged him. Here's an idea, Prime Minister. If he really wants to hit them where it hurts, he should tighten the rules on tax avoidance. But at the very least, does he agree that anyone running to be Prime Minister should declare where they and their families have been domiciled for tax purposes and whether they've ever been a beneficiary of an offshore tax scheme?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, everybody in this Parliament, everybody in this House pays their full whack of tax in this country, and I think that people should, members across the House should cease this constant vilification of each other. I think people pay their fair share of taxes, and quite right. What we're doing, and it's thanks to the tax yield that we have had, that we're able to support the people of this country in the way that we are. So we've been able to increase universal credit by £1,000, Mr. Speaker. We're putting £326 from tomorrow into the bank accounts of those who need it most, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the policies we have pursued, as I have just told you, we have unemployment at or near record lows. And that is what counts, Mr. Speaker. No, they are very happy to see people languish on benefits. We believe in getting people into good jobs. And I'm looking for one.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure he's been keeping up with what's happening in the last few days. Over the weekend, the candidates to replace him have promised £330 billion in giveaways. That's roughly double the annual budget for the NHS. Sadly, they haven't found time to explain how they're paying for it, even though one of them's the Chancellor and another one was Chancellor until a week ago. They all backed 15 tax rises. Now they're acting as if they've just arrived from the moon, saying it should never have happened. Doesn't he agree that rather than desperately rewriting history, they should at least explain exactly where they're getting all this cash from?
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, he's completely wrong. I've been listening very carefully, and all the commitments that I'm listening to are very clear. We will continue. Whoever is elected will continue to put more police out on the street, exactly as we promised. Already at 13,576, we're going to go up to 20,000. Whoever takes over will build. They always complain about this, but we will build the 40 new hospitals, Mr. Speaker. And I asked my delivery unit yesterday. Well, they don't want it. They don't like it, Mr. Speaker, because they voted against the funding. They voted against the funding that makes it possible, Mr. Speaker. And they have also, just in the last period in which he has been in office, made extra commitments of public spending worth £94 billion, which would be thousands of pounds of extra taxation for every family in the country, Mr. Speaker. That's the difference between them and us.
Yes, Starmer.
Totally deluded to the bitter end. Now, to be fair...
Mr. Oldham, I think that's the last time I hear from you today. I think otherwise you might be able to buy a couple of other people cups of tea.
To be fair to the new Chancellor, he's at least attempted to spell it out. He's promised tens of billions in tax cuts and confirmed he would cut the NHS, the police and school budgets by 20% to fund it. The member for Stratford and Gibraltar is complaining, but he said it on TV. And yesterday he said it's simply not right that families are seeing their bills skyrocket and we do nothing. Was the Chancellor speaking on behalf of the government, Prime Minister, when he promised huge spending cuts and when he said that they're doing nothing on the cost of living crisis?
Prime Minister. Look, Mr. Speaker, this is really pitiful stuff from the party that voted against the £39 billion which is necessary to pay for those 50,000 nurses which we're recruiting, and we will recruit by 2024, Mr. Speaker, which is necessary to pay for those hospitals and those doctors and those scans and that treatment. They don't have a leg to stand on, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell him something else. The reason we've got growth now at 0.5% in May is because we took the tough decisions to come out of lockdown on July the 19th last year, which he said was reckless. Never forget, he said it was reckless. Our economy would not be strong enough now to make the payments we are to our fantastic NHS, and they know it.
Stop up. I really am going to miss this weekly nonsense from him. Let's move on. Let's move on from his current Chancellor to his former Chancellor. Last week, he resigned, accusing the Prime Minister of not conducting government properly, competently or seriously. He suggested the Prime Minister is not prepared to work hard or take difficult decisions, and implied that the Prime Minister cannot tell the public the truth. Yesterday, he claimed his big plan is to rebuild the economy. Now, even the Prime Minister must be impressed by that Johnsonian brass-neckery. Can the Prime Minister think of any jobs his former Chancellor may have had that means he bears some responsibility for an economy that he now claims is broken?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody who's played a part in the last 3 years has done a remarkable job in helping this country through very difficult times. I just want to say to him, really, Mr. Speaker, the next leader of my party may be elected by acclamation, so it's possible this will be our last confrontation over this. It's possible. So I want to thank him. I want to thank him for the style in which he's conducted himself. I think it'd be fair to say he's been considerably less lethal than many other members of this House. And I'll tell you why that is. Because he hasn't come up.
Can I just say to this end of this front bench, I expect better behaviour, and I'm certainly going to get it. Prime Minister.
There's a reason for that, Mr. Speaker. Over 3 years, in spite of every opportunity, he's never really come up with an idea, a plan, or a vision for this country. And I can tell you that at the end of 3 years, Mr. Speaker, we got Brexit done, which he voted against 48 times. We delivered the first vaccine in the world and rolled it out faster than any other European country, which would never possibly listen to him, Mr. Speaker. And we played a decisive role in helping to protect the people of Ukraine from the brutal invasion of Vladimir Putin and helped to save Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to say that we are continuing, and every one of the 8 candidates will continue, with the biggest ever programme of infrastructure, skills and technology across this country to level up in a way that will benefit the constituents of every member of this House, Mr. Speaker. And it's perfectly true that I leave not at a time of my choosing. And it's absolutely true. But I am proud of the fantastic teamwork that has been involved in all of those projects, both nationally and internationally, Mr. Speaker. And I'm also proud of the leadership that I have given. And I will be leaving, Mr. Speaker. I will be leaving soon with my head held high.
The convicted double-child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork was granted parole last year by the Independent Parole Board in the face of enormous opposition from whistleblowers and my South Leicestershire constituents. Only 2 months after he was released, he was recalled to prison for having breached his licence conditions. He has another parole board hearing scheduled for September. Prime Minister, you and I have communicated about this matter on numerous occasions, and you've assured me that you would do everything in your power to deal with this situation. Can you confirm, before you leave office, that your government will make all the necessary submissions that it can make lawfully to the Independent Parole Board to make sure that this dangerous man is kept behind bars?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend for his campaign. Our thoughts, of course, with the victims of Pitchfork, Lydia and Dawn's friends and family. And, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House that my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, will be submitting his views on the Pitchfork case to the Parole Board before his hearing, and there is also, as the House will know, a root and branch review of the parole system currently underway, which includes plans for greater ministerial oversight for the most serious offenders, and we'll be bringing that forward as soon as parliamentary time allows.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in the murder of Shinzo Abe, a dreadful event that took place last weekend? Can I also thank you, Mr. Speaker, for hosting last night the charity remembering Srebrenica? We should all take time this week, on the 27th anniversary of the genocide that took place there, to think of the circumstances and the shame that we were not able to step in and stop the murder of so many innocent boys and men and the rape of so many women. And that we must learn the lessons from that. And of course, at this time, we think very much of those in Ukraine that are facing a war criminal, and make sure that those responsible are ultimately held to account for crimes against humanity. Mr. Speaker, the Tory leadership contest is quickly descending into a toxic race to the right, and it's clear that whoever wins that race, Scotland loses. The former Chancellor has pledged to govern like Margaret Thatcher. The current Chancellor is threatening 20% cuts to the NHS and public services. And they're all trying to outdo each other on an extreme Brexit, costing the economy billions. Is the real reason that the Prime Minister won't endorse any of these awful candidates because whoever becomes the next Tory leader will make Genghis Khan look like a moderate?
Prime Minister.
I feel a real twinge, Mr. Speaker, that this is probably virtually the last time I'll have the opportunity to answer a question to perhaps because he's going or because I'm going, I don't know. Mr. Speaker, all I would say to him is that I think that the next leader of my party will want to make sure that we do everything we can to work with the Scottish Government in the way that I've been able to do and I'm proud to have done over the last few years to protect and secure our union. And my strong view, Mr. Speaker, having listened to him very carefully for years and years now, is that we are much, much better together.
Ian Blackford.
I can say with all sincerity, I hope whoever is the next Tory leader will be as popular in Scotland as he has been. Because for people in Scotland, Westminster has never looked so out of touch. We've got right-wing Tory contenders prioritising tax cuts for the rich and a zombie UK government failing to tackle the cost of living crisis. Whilst the Tories are busy tearing lumpouts of each other, money-saving expert Martin Lewis has warned the energy price cap could soon rise by a sickening 65% in October to £3,244 a year. After a decade of Tory cuts and Brexit price rises, it will mean many families simply can't afford to put food on the table and heat their homes. Scotland literally can't afford the cost of living with Westminster. Does the Prime Minister not get that people in Scotland don't just want rid of him, they want rid of the whole rotten Westminster system.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's not what is actually happening in this country, is that we're using the fiscal firepower that we built up to cut taxes for working people, cut taxes for those on low incomes, and you saw that last week in the average of £330 tax cut on national insurance. We're increasing support for those vulnerable households from tomorrow, another £326 going in. And Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to our union that we were able to deliver the furlough scheme, which helped the entire country, and to make the massive transfers that boost the whole of the UK economy. And I think that the last thing the people of Scotland need now, the last thing they need is more constitutional wrangling when we need to fix the economy.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After securing almost £14 million in my town's fund bid for Cheadle, I was delighted last week to get the green light for our new Cheadle rail station and £4 million for our state-of-the-art eco-business park. I've had tremendous support from the Cheadle Towns Board and local community, who understand how important it is to have connected towns and villages, bringing investment and high-tech jobs to our area. I'm ambitious for Cheadle, and now want to secure the redoubling of the Mid-Cheshire Line and the extension of Metrolink through my constituency. Will my right honourable friend join me in thanking the Towns Board and Station Working Group for their support, and agree with me that improving connectivity is key to economic growth and the future of our levelling up?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to the massive exertions of this government in levelling up, with the £650 billion investment in infrastructure, that we're having got a new railway station in Cheadle, for instance, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the bids that my honourable friend has just mentioned are now being actively studied by the Department for Transport, and she should feed in more to them.
Stephen Farrett.
Thank you. In a recent opinion poll conducted by Lucid Talk for Queen's University, only 5% of the people of Northern Ireland expressed any trust whatsoever in this government. So as the Prime Minister prepares to leave office shortly, will he apologise for his legacy in Northern Ireland, in which power sharing has collapsed, the Good Friday Agreement has been undermined, an unwanted protocol bill is being imposed upon the people and businesses of Northern Ireland, and Anglo-Irish relations are in their worst state for 40 years?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, because actually what we've got, and I know that every single one of the candidates will want to deliver this, is a bill to fix the problem of the protocol, and I accept that there is a problem, and I hope that the whole House will support it.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as this is probably the last time I'll get to address the Prime Minister at this dispatch box, can I say on behalf of the people of Redcar and Cleveland how grateful we are for the support that he's given us and for delivering on the will of 17.4 million people in taking us out of the EU. Can I ask the Prime Minister, is he as optimistic as I am about our future as a free and independent nation?
Jacob, I mean, my honourable friend, if anything, I think I'm even more optimistic. And my only anxiety, we all know that people think that this will be. There are people around the world who hope that this will be the end of Brexit, and I can see them all. Oh, look at them! Did you notice? Did you notice? That's them. They're wrong, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to show that they're wrong.
We now come to Martin Day.
Mr. Speaker, if the UK truly is a voluntary union of equal nations, there must be a democratic way for any of those member nations to withdraw from it. By what right does the PM think the role of the UK government is to decide whether to respect a mandate given by the people of Scotland to their government and endorsed by their Parliament?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I continually advise the members of the Scottish National Party, or Nationalist Party I should say, they should look at what is happening in educational standards in Scotland, which they are responsible for, instead of endlessly asking for a repeat of a constitutional event that we had in 2014. We had a vote, Mr. Speaker, they lost.
Catherine Fletcher.
The Prime Minister knows how proud we are of our industrial heritage in the north of England and what it means for our future. So last Friday, it was a joy to be on the banks of the Ribble with the Friends of the Old Tram Bridge, a group that are asking for this historic piece of industrial architecture that crosses the Ribble to be reopened. Vote for the utility, and because we're bloody proud of it. So, does the Prime Minister share my hope that Preston City Council will include the plans to get the bridge reopened as part of their Levelling Up Fund bid?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's possibly fair to say that I'm responsible for building more river crossings than anybody else in this House, including and bridges. Including Suggett's Lane crossing, Mr. Speaker, which I delivered for my honourable friend. I think at this stage in my political career, I could not, in all honesty, promise that I can deliver this bridge, Mr. Speaker. But I think that she has 8 people to whom she could direct that request right now, and she's in a strong bargaining position, Mr. Speaker.
Let's double Roberts.
Child poverty has increased in every part of Wales in the last 7 years under Tory cuts to public services and malign welfare policies. In the communities I represent, 37% of children are now growing up in poverty. He has one last chance to make a real difference to these children's lives before he leaves office. Will he scrap the 2-child limit and reinstate the £20 uplift for all families entitled to welfare?
Mr. Speaker, it's of course the Labour government in Wales that's responsible for schools, but what we have been doing is not only increasing the living wage by £1,000, providing the financial support, the £37 billion worth of financial support that I've mentioned, but helping councils, Mr. Speaker, with a £1.5 billion household support fund to get the families such as those she mentions through the tough times, and we will come out very strongly the other side.
We now come to a close question to Mike Penning.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I'm delighted that there will be a new hospital scheme in this area. I'm told that the local hospital trust have considered a full range of options, and that they consider that new hospital builds at Watford General, alongside further investment at Hemel Hempstead and St Albans hospitals, represent the best option for health services in the area.
Sir Mike Penning.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for delivering Brexit and the fantastic vaccine rollout programme that I was proud to be involved with and saved so many lives in my constituency and around the country. Sadly, the Trust have not considered all options, and in my constituents will be astonished as to what they have said by saying that they now want £1.2 billion for the refurbished tower block situation in Watford. So could the Prime Minister do me a great favour before he leaves? Can he put a little note in the drawer of number 10, so when the new incumbent comes in to say Penning needs a new hospital on a greenfield site?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that I will ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss his proposals.
John Trickett.
Thank you, sir. We now know that every ambulance service in the whole country is in a critical state. But last week, well before the current national heatwave emergency, my constituent, Mrs. Meacham, died following waiting for hours for an ambulance in an excruciating and prolonged delay. Her daughter tells me that the family tragedy wasn't caused by the staff, but by cutbacks by this government. But in any event, without immediate and drastic action, we cannot be sure that there won't be many more Mrs. Meachams. Does the PM accept we now are living through an emergency health crisis? And given the disastrous state he's leaving the NHS in, why is he still in Downing Street?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the NHS now has a record. He talks about staffing levels. The NHS now has a record number of people working in it. 10,900 more nurses this year than there were last year. 6,000 more doctors. And on ambulances, and he's right, it's absolutely critical. The crucial thing is to help the hospital staff to move patients through the system. And too often, I'm afraid, it is impossible because a proportion of the patients, sadly, are in delayed discharge, and that is making life very, very difficult for the ambulances as they come up to hospital. But that is why it is so crucial that this government, in addition to everything else we've done, Mr. Speaker, is fixing social care and helping patients out of hospital. And that's why we put in the £39 billion, Mr. Speaker, which unfortunately his party voted against.
Brereton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for all he's done to help level up Stoke-on-Trent? The number of workless households in our city has halved over the last decade of Conservatives in government. So would my right honourable friend agree that the best way to level up Stoke-on-Trent is to get more people in well-skilled, better-paid employment opportunities?
I think he's absolutely right, and the right honourable gentleman knows a lot more about Stoke Newington than he knows about Stoke, and that is absolutely true, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud that we're getting young people into work. I was up and down the country. I was at an event last night to celebrate the 163,000 Kickstarters who we've helped into work, and that is our ambition, to help people into good jobs, and we are succeeding. I'm proud to say I leave office, Mr. Speaker, with unemployment at roughly 3.8%. When they last left office, it was at 8%. That's the difference between them and us.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night's panorama with the joint investigation with the Times newspaper has exposed yet again more evidence of unlawful killings by special forces, this time in Afghanistan. When this came up before, the government, and in particular the MOD, was determined to sweep this under the carpet. But those who serve in uniform and the public they protect deserve better than this. These aren't vexatious claims from campaigning lawyers. They come from within the armed forces themselves, and indeed from our allies in Australia. So will the Prime Minister commit to an Australia-style independent inquiry as backed by General Lord Richards? But more broadly, hasn't the case been made again for democratic oversight of special forces?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's a long-standing practice, I think, accepted on both sides of this House, that we do not comment on special forces. That does not mean that we in any way accept the factual accuracy of the claims to which he is alluded. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, nor does it mean that anybody who serves in Her Majesty's Armed Forces is above the law.
Can I just warn other members that there is a sub judice on this? I allowed that question because it was very general, and that's the only way I would ever allow it to be discussed. Andrew Lewer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few years, campaigning and persistence have led to the construction of a new children's A&E, and just this year a new main A&E for Northampton General Hospital in my constituency. Building on this success, what the town now needs is an urgent treatment centre. Does the Prime Minister agree that this would be a hugely welcome step in providing top-quality health care in Northampton?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, I think earlier on, we're engaged in a massive programme of improvements and building and rebuilding in our NHS estate. I think that, with great respect to my honourable friend, this is a decision that he's going to have to continue to lobby for. I think the local NHS bodies will have to make up their minds on that one, but I'm sure he will continue to make lively representations.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister was forced to announce his intention to resign after ministers who supported him only days earlier changed their minds. Of course, people are allowed to change their minds, and this should be recognised. Why does the Prime Minister and his MPs believe this principle applies everywhere except in Scotland, where the people delivered a clear mandate to the Scottish Parliament to hold an independence referendum.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, the people of the SNP are currently deciding what to do with my honourable friend. And heaven forfend that they should change their minds, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 40 years ago, 10 young people from Rugby's West Indian community travelled to a house in New Cross Road, London, for a birthday celebration for former Rugby resident Yvonne Ruddick. Tragically, there was a fire at the house where the party was held, and 2 of that group never returned home. Others were traumatised. The fire cost 13 people their lives and has been the subject of 2 inquests, both of which were inconclusive. Those who survived and the families of the bereaved are calling for a further investigation. I wonder if the Prime Minister would agree that the appointment of the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner provides an opportunity to re-examine the events of that time.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know from my own experience of running the city of the anguish that particular tragedy caused, and I know the deep feeling that surrounds it, Mr. Speaker. I thank him for raising it, and I can tell him, of course, that whatever my own views, this is a matter for the independent Metropolitan Police Service, and I'm sure the new Commissioner will be considering what he has just said.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While he was editor of The Spectator, he published a poem about exterminating the Scotch, a verminous race. He previously stated that £1 spent in Croydon is of more value to the country than £1 spent in Strathclyde. He called for an ending of the Barnett formula, and he stated an MP from a Scottish constituency shouldn't be a Prime Minister. So, given his anti-Scottish views, his abject failure as a Prime Minister, why did he think he's a right to try and block a democratic vote for Scotland to choose its future away from this corrupt Westminster?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that after 3 years of listening to this delirium of monotony from the Scottish nationalists, I really think they need to change the record. What the people of this country want is a focus on the cost of living, a focus on the economy, and making sure on schools, Mr. Speaker, on standards in schools. Those are things that he should fix, Mr. Speaker, and to say nothing of the tragedy of drug deaths in Scotland, Mr. Speaker, which they still haven't done anything to address, Mr. Speaker, and everything I have seen has taught me that we are far, far better, whether it's on Ukraine or COVID, Mr. Speaker, or on furlough. There is absolutely no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that we are better off working together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kensington is at the heart of the Ukrainian community, and on their behalf, I would like to first send their huge thanks for your support to Ukraine. Yesterday was the first-year anniversary of the devastating flooding that affected my constituency, with more than 1,000 homes affected, people in basement flats losing all of their belongings, and many people still in temporary accommodation. Would my right honourable friend back my fight to ensure that we get serious investment in infrastructure in West London from Thames Water?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and I know that I know the problem of that she speaks of very well. There's no single solution to tackling surface water flooding. But she's absolutely right in wanting to put more pressure on Thames Water to try to come up with sustainable solutions. But they've got to be done working with partners, with councils, and of course with developers as well.
Final question, Sam Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few short weeks ago, Zara Alina was walking home through Ilford. She was dragged off the street and brutally murdered. Zara's family made a touching tribute for her life. She was authentic, refused to try and impress anyone, but she impressed us. She was the rock of our family. Last week, on the 8th of July, another woman was stabbed in St John's Road, just yards from my family's church that I attended for 15 years, so I know like the back of my hand. Women in Ilford should not have to police themselves or impose curfews on their behaviour when they want to just go about their daily business. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to know whether the Prime Minister will commit to greater allocation of funding in terms of policing that's targeted on specialist knife crime into Ilford and across all of that part of North East London. And in addition, Mr. Speaker, what measures will this government actually take that will make a difference to the lives of women? Will they toughen sentences for rape, stalking, domestic violence, and put in place proper police support to end, Mr. Speaker, the epidemic of violence in this country against women and girls?
Just before the Prime Minister answers, just to say it's very important. I've allowed it to raise. Be careful of going into detail on the first name because it is sub judice, but in general terms, I'm sure that we can answer it. Prime Minister.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your guidance, but I think we can say safely how much we sympathise with the victim and her family. On knife crime, it is a scourge, Mr. Speaker, and I believe there are many different solutions, but one of them is unquestionably allowing the police to do more stop and search and making sure we have more police out on the street. And that's why we've made the massive investments that we have, and I hope that those investments will be continued, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that they will be. And on rape and serious sexual offences particularly against women, this is incredibly important to the whole House, and it's something that we have worked on very hard over the last 3 years. And what we have done, Mr. Speaker, is not only introduced more street lights and done everything we can to give women, invested more into independent sexual violence advisors and domestic violence advisors and all the people you need to give victims the confidence they need to get cases to trial, which is such a problem, Mr. Speaker. But what we've also done, in addition to putting more police out on the streets and specialist units to tackle this, what we've also done is introduced tougher sentences for rape and serious sexual violence, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, I was amazed, and it's still the case, that his party voted against those tougher sentences. That was a great mistake, and I think they should take it back.
At the start of Prime Minister's questions, the Honourable Member, for East Lothian, Kirkcaldy and Cowden Beath persistently denied the authority of the Chair. In their absence, I wish to proceed to name them and call on the leader to move the relevant names. So I name Kenny Maskell, Neil Hanvey, and I'm sure now the leader will pick it up.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey be suspended from the service of this House.
The question is that Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey be suspended from this House. As many of their opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. We now move to the urgent question at Colwest Streeting.
No, taking voice.
Jacob, I knew what you were doing. Thank you. I understand that you want to raise a point of order relevant to the questions that you just asked. Right, in which case I will take that one point of order. Sir Mike Penny.
As a former minister, I'm very aware of the information that's given to ministers and prime ministers when they're going to answer a question, especially when the question has been pre-informed. The information the Speaker was given was that, that my trust, my hospital trust, have looked at all options for the decision on the new hospital in my part of the world. That is not correct, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to put on the record that the Prime Minister has been misled by my trust, and it's not the Prime Minister's fault that he had that information.
I'm not going to carry on the debate of the question, but I would say you certainly go on the record. I'm sure the Trust will be reading it as you sat down. Right, let's try again with the urgent question, West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the new Secretary of State if he will make a statement on ambulance services and the declaration of a national heatwave emergency.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our ambulance service performs heroics every single day, and I want to put on record my thanks to every single one of them for all their dedication and hard work. And we do have a duty to support this vital service,